The wind tore through the trees like a beast on the hunt, howling across the plains, whipping up dust and dry leaves, and clawing at the ragged buckskin that hung from Nani's thin shoulders. Blood trickled down her inner thigh, hot and sticky, dark against her bronze skin. Her breath came in gasps as she braced herself against a half-dead oak, shielding her daughter with her body. The little girl whimpered, her tiny fingers clutching at her mother's waist, eyes wide with confusion, fear, and something far worse, resignation. "They left us," Nani whispered, her voice more wind than words. She wasn't speaking to the child. She was speaking to the sky, to the trees, to the spirits that surely had turned their backs. Her tribe had called her cursed. The Comanche did not abandon their own without reason, and yet here she was, cast out like refused because of dreams and whispers, omens and suspicion. Because she had dared to carry life during a season of war and death. Because her husband had died with an arrow in his throat and a look of blame in his glassy eyes. Because she had survived and they needed someone to blame. Her belly, swollen with the weight of a child nearly ready to arrive, ached from within. The pain came in sharp pulses now, rolling over her like waves crashing into a sinking canoe. She gritted her teeth and swallowed her screams for her daughter's sake. The child, small, dark-eyed, dirt-smeared, watched her with a silence too old for 5 years. "I'm sorry," Nani murmured, brushing a strand of tangled hair from her daughter's face. "We will not die here. I won't let us." But the wind answered back with nothing but bitter cold. They had walked for 2 days without food, stumbling through sparse woods and across frozen creeks, the early spring offering no warmth and no mercy. The moccasins she'd worn had long since split open at the soles. Her feet were raw and bleeding, each step a test. Her daughter, light as she was, could no longer be carried. And now the contractions came closer together. Her body had betrayed her. It had chosen this moment, this impossible moment, to bring new life into a world that had no place for it. She slid down the tree, gasping, her legs giving out. Her daughter knelt beside her, pressing her small hands to her mother's face. "Mother," the girl asked in broken English, the language she'd picked up from old traders. Nani blinked at her. That word, that fragile word. What did it mean to be a mother when death circled like vultures overhead? A sudden movement in the trees made her flinch. A rabbit startled. Or a wolf. Or worse. She tightened her grip around her daughter, one hand slipping instinctively to the small flint knife strapped to her leg. The blade was dull, barely able to cut bark, but it was the last weapon she had. Night was coming. The sky turned purple and gray, bruised like her spirit. She knew what would happen if she gave birth out here. She had seen women die in warm lodges, surrounded by family, with herbs and midwives, and chanting to guide the baby into the world. Out here, it would be agony. The cold would sap her strength. Infection would fester, and her daughter would be alone. The thought dug deeper than the pain in her belly. She tried to pray, not to any god she knew, but to the dirt, to the sky, to anything that would listen. "Let her live," she whispered. "Take me if you must, but let her live." The wind howled again, this time with a voice that wasn't hers. Hooves. Slow. Measured. A horse. Nani froze, heart hammering in her chest. Her daughter looked up, eyes wide, clutching her mother's arm. A dark figure emerged from the tree line. A man on horseback, wrapped in a long coat, wide-brimmed hat low over his eyes. A rifle rested across his lap. He wasn't Comanche. That much was clear. His skin was pale, his beard unkempt, and his expression unreadable beneath the hat's shadow. He reined the horse to a stop, just far enough not to spook them, and looked down at the huddled pair beneath the oak. The woman, the child, the blood, the knife clutched in a trembling hand. He didn't move for a long moment. Neither did she. Then, slowly, deliberately, he swung down from a saddle. The horse snorted and pawed at the dirt, sensing tension. The man held his hands out to the sides, palms up, showing he carried nothing in them. "I ain't gonna hurt you," he said, voice low and rough as gravel. She said nothing, just tightened her grip on the knife. Her breath came in shallow bursts now, pain stabbing through her belly again. The man took a cautious step forward, his eyes flicking from her face to the child, then to the blood. "You're going to die out here," he said plainly. "Both of you." Still, she didn't speak. Another step. Closer now. "You need help," he added. "I've got a cabin not far. Fire. Food. A bed. You won't make it through the night out here." She shook her head once. Quick. Desperate. "I'm not the enemy," he said, kneeling in the dirt about 6 feet away. "Not looking to hurt women or children. Just hunting deer. Found you instead." The girl looked at him, then up at her mother. Nani could barely sit up now. The knife slipped from her hand and fell to the dirt with a soft thud. Her eyes rolled back. She collapsed sideways, unconscious. The man didn't wait. He rushed forward, catching her just before her head hit the roots. He scooped her up with effort. She was heavier than she looked, between exhaustion and pregnancy. She groaned in his arms. He looked at the little girl, who stared at him like a cornered fox. "She yours?" he asked. The girl nodded once. "Can you walk?" Another nod. "Good. Stay close." He carried the woman to the horse and hoisted her over the saddle as gently as he could. She moaned again, then went still. Her belly was hard beneath the blood-soaked leather. The baby was coming, and fast. The man looked at the little girl. "Name?" She hesitated. "Tiva." "I'm Silas," he said. "Come on, Tiva. Stay close. We'll get her warm." The girl followed. The three of them disappeared into the forest, the trees swallowing them whole. The night deepened, and far behind, the wind howled again. It was nearly dark when Silas reached his cabin, a squat log structure nestled between hills, nearly hidden from the main trail. He opened the door with his boot and laid the woman down on his bed. The fire had gone low. He tossed on wood, stoking it to life. He grabbed a worn wool blanket from a trunk and covered her. She shivered. Blood had soaked through her leggings. The contractions were coming quick now. He didn't need a midwife to see that. "Tiva," he said, looking to the girl who stood near the hearth, arms wrapped around herself. "There's a bucket. Get some water from the barrel outside." She nodded and darted out. Fast. Quiet. Silas washed his hands in cold water. They were trembling. He hadn't helped deliver a baby since his own had been born, stillborn years ago. He hadn't touched a woman since. He cursed under his breath, grabbed a knife, and began cutting strips from a clean shirt. He worked quickly, talking softly as he did. "You're not going to die here, lady. I won't let you." The woman groaned, her eyes fluttering open for a second. Pain etched across her face. "Breathe," he said. "Stay with me. You're stronger than this storm." Tiva returned with the water. He dipped cloth into it, cleaned what he could. The woman cried out. The baby was coming. Time lost meaning after that, just blood, heat, and screams. He worked on instinct and panic, but finally the baby came, silent at first, then with a shrill cry that echoed in the tiny cabin. A girl. He wrapped her in a wool cloth and handed her to Tiva, whose eyes widened in awe. She clutched her little sister like something made of glass. Silas slumped back, exhausted, blood on his arms, his shirt soaked. The mother was breathing, barely. He sat down on the floor beside the bed and stared into the fire. "What the hell have I just gotten into?" he muttered. Tiva didn't answer. She just watched her mother watch the fire and held the baby tight. Outside, the wind quieted. But in the woods, something still watched. Morning crept in slow, dragging pale gray light across the forest. Fog clung low to the earth like breath held too long. Inside the cabin, the fire had dimmed to coals, and smoke drifted lazily in the air. Silas sat on a wooden stool, elbows resting on his knees, hands slick with dried blood and sweat. He hadn't slept. He hadn't dared. The woman, Nani, he'd overheard the girl whisper the name, lay pale and still on his cot, wrapped in every blanket he could find. Her skin was damp, her breathing shallow. The baby, swaddled tight in a worn flannel shirt, had fallen asleep in the crook of her sister's arms. Tiva hadn't moved from that spot all night. Silas watched the girls. Tiva stared at him in return, silent, still, like some wild animal unsure whether the man across the room meant to offer food or set a trap. She blinked slowly, her eyes older than they should have been. That look struck him harder than any bullet could have. He remembered it. He'd worn it once, long ago, when everything he'd known had died in the span of a week. He ran a hand over his unshaven jaw, the bristles sharp and itchy. His body ached from holding Nani up through the worst of her labor, from kneeling on hard floors, from tension that hadn't let go yet. But something in him, something he thought long gone, refused to leave them. Not after what he'd seen. Not after hearing her scream into the night, and still cling to life with a fire that refused to burn out. He stood, stretched slowly, joints popping, and moved to the hearth. The girl flinched slightly. He stopped short, raising a hand. "I'm just putting on water," he said gently. Tiva didn't respond, but her shoulders eased a little. He stoked the coals, added kindling, and soon the fire snapped to life. The scent of wood smoke filled the air. He poured water from a jug into a tin pot and set it above the flames. Minutes passed. Nani stirred. She gasped sharply, hand reaching out before her eyes opened. Silas crossed the room quickly and crouched beside the bed. "You're all right," he said softly. "You're safe." She blinked, breathing hard, lips cracked. She tried to sit up, winced, and fell back. "Don't try to move too quick," he added. "You lost a lot of blood." Her eyes darted around the cabin, landing on the baby, then on her older daughter. Relief flooded her face, and she relaxed just a little. Then her gaze found Silas again, hard, untrusting. "I'm Silas," he said, sensing the questions in her eyes. "I found you out in the trees." "You were," he glanced down. "You wouldn't have made it through the night." She stared at him, unmoving. "You delivered the child?" she asked, her voice hoarse and broken. He nodded once. "Did what I could." There was a long silence between them. Then, slowly, Nani reached for her baby. Tiva gently passed the child over, and she cradled the infant to her chest, murmuring soft, melodic words Silas didn't understand. "She all right?" he asked. "She's strong," Nani replied. "Like her sister." Silas looked at Tiva again. The girl sat straighter, pride glowing in her eyes for the first time. "She's got your fight," he said. Nani narrowed her eyes slightly. "Why help us?" That question had been waiting. He knew it was fair. He didn't have a good answer. Not one that made sense. "'Cause someone should have," he said at last. "That's all." Her expression didn't change, but she looked down at the baby again, arms tightening slightly around the child. "I'm not looking for anything," he added. "You're free to leave once you're strong enough. I ain't holding you here." "And where would I go?" she asked bitterly. "I am hunted by my people and feared by yours." Silas looked away. He knew the feeling of being unclaimed, of belonging nowhere. "You can stay here," he said, "for as long as you need." Nani didn't answer, but she didn't refuse either. By midday, she had enough strength to sit up with her back braced against the log wall. Silas fed the fire, cooked broth from dried venison and roots, and set the steaming bowl near her. She accepted it without thanks, but not without hunger. She sipped slowly, wincing at the heat, but drank it all. Tiva moved to sit beside her mother, resting her head gently on her shoulder. Nani's hand moved to the girl's hair, fingers tangling in it with quiet affection. Silas watched the moment, felt something stir deep inside, something like memory or longing. He turned away, busied himself cleaning the space. The cabin was small, one main room, a hearth, a cot, a table with 2 chairs, and shelves stacked with simple tools and canned goods. He'd built it years ago with his own hands after riding west, running from ghosts and debts, and a war that had taken too many names. It had suited him fine being alone. Until now. As the day wore on, Nani spoke little, but Silas noticed the way her eyes followed everything, his movements, the sounds outside, the way her daughter moved through the space. She was always watching. She didn't trust him. That was smart. He fixed a second cot that evening, spreading a straw-stuffed mattress near the hearth, covering it with thick blankets. He gestured to it. "Sleep there. It's warmer." "I will sleep here," she said, voice even. Silas didn't press. He nodded and stepped outside, letting the door thud shut behind him. The air outside was crisp. The forest whispered with night birds and the soft rustling of trees. He lit a pipe, leaned against the railing, and stared up at the stars. Too many nights, those stars had looked like judgment. Now, they looked like questions. What was he doing, bringing them here? What was he inviting in? Inside the cabin, Nani lay back slowly, every movement stiff with pain. Her daughter curled beside her, the baby nestled between them. She stared at the roof beams above, listening to the fire crackle, feeling warmth soak into her bones. She remembered the cold, the dark, the edge of death. She remembered Silas's hands, rough, trembling, but careful. She didn't trust him, but she didn't fear him. She slept lightly, waking to every creak of the logs and shift of the wind. At one point, she saw Silas by the fire, adding wood, moving slowly. She didn't speak, and neither did he. The next morning, she was stronger. She sat upright, fed the baby, and even managed a few steps across the room with Tiva's help. Silas offered her fresh bread and a bit of jam. She ate without comment. "Your daughter," he said at one point. "She's smart, quiet, got good sense." Nani nodded. "She has survived. That makes her wise." They were simple words, but the weight of them pressed down on Silas like a boulder. He glanced toward Tiva, who sat near the door, playing quietly with a bit of twine she turned into a loop. He crouched down beside her, holding out a small wooden carving, a bear roughly whittled from pine. "Here," he said, "something to hold." She looked at the carving, then at her mother. Nani gave a slight nod. Tiva took it, held it like it might crumble. Then, with the smallest smile, she looked up and said, "Thank you." Silas tipped his hat. "Ain't nothin'." That evening, as they sat in silence while the stew bubbled and the fire snapped, Nani spoke without looking at him. "My husband died in a raid. My people blamed me, said I carried death inside me. They told me to leave or be left to rot. So I left." Silas said nothing for a while, just stirred the stew. "I had a wife," he replied eventually, "and a son. Fever took them. I left too. Didn't know where else to go." For a while, there was only the sound of fire and broth. Then Nani said, "This place is quiet." Silas looked around the cabin. "It's lonely," he admitted, "but I reckon it don't have to be." She didn't answer, but she didn't turn away either. As the moon climbed high and the fire burned low, the cabin in the hollow felt less like a place for hiding and more like a place waiting to be filled. Outside, unseen in the dark, the wind shifted. Not cold now, but changing, watching, and far off in the trees, a footprint slowly filled with melting snow. The morning sun filtered through pine branches, casting long golden bars across the cabin floor. Smoke curled from the chimney, and inside, warmth and quiet had taken root, softening the hard edges of winter. Silas stood outside, sharpening his knife on a whetstone, eyes flicking to the tree-lean as he worked. The rhythm of the blade against stone was steady, precise, but his shoulders stayed tight, his jaw clenched. Something had changed in the woods. He couldn't explain it, not in words. Just a shift in the way the birds moved. In the silence between the wind. Too still, too quiet. Nani watched him from inside the cabin, her daughter perched beside her, weaving twine into a makeshift doll. The baby slept in a woven basket near the hearth, bundled in soft hides. Peace had started to root here, tentative and brittle, like the first crocus pushing through thawed earth. Silas had given them safety, warmth, and the dignity of healing. But Nani knew well enough that peace was never more dangerous than when you believed it permanent. He returned near midday, carrying a hare in one hand and a strange look in his eyes. He laid the catch on the table, wiped his hands on a rag, and stared at her. "There were boot prints," he said, voice low. Nani stiffened. "North side of the ridge," he continued. "2 sets. Maybe 3. Not yours. Not mine. And not fresh enough to be just passing through." She stood slowly, careful not to wake the baby. "Who are they?" He shook his head. "Could be hunters. Could be worse. Don't like the way they moved. Too close to the tree line. Watching." Nani's fingers curled into the fabric of her skirt. "You have enemies?" Silas met her gaze without blinking. "I have a past." She didn't press. Didn't have to. Everyone who lived this far from civilization was running from something. He moved through the cabin with practiced focus, checking the rifle, counting ammunition, making mental lists of supplies. The air grew tight with preparation. Survival had a scent: wood smoke, sweat, iron, and it filled every corner. Later that night, he sat on the porch again, a loaded rifle across his lap. The moon rose full and watchful, silvering the leaves. Nani stepped outside, arms wrapped around herself, and sat beside him without a word. They listened to the forest. "They find us," she said finally. "What then?" "We fight," he replied. She nodded. There was no fear in her voice, only certainty. "I will not let them take my daughters." Silas looked at her then, the curve of her face illuminated by moonlight, eyes fixed on the trees like she could stare danger into stillness. "You know how to shoot?" he asked. She gave a faint smile. "Not well, but I have good aim with a blade." He chuckled, dry and low. "You'll do." The next morning, he set a rifle in her hands. She held it awkwardly at first, but she learned quickly, adjusting her stance, correcting her grip, eyes narrowed with focus. He showed her how to brace against the recoil, how to exhale before squeezing the trigger. She missed the first 2 shots, but the third cracked the air and splintered a bottle set on a fence post. Tiva watched from the cabin doorway, eyes wide with wonder. When Silas handed her a small slingshot, her smile bloomed like summer sunlight. She took to it faster than her mother, sending pebbles zipping through the air with uncanny accuracy. One ricocheted off the doorframe and nearly clipped Silas's hat. He raised a brow. "Remind me not to get on your bad side." Nani allowed herself a laugh, short but real. It felt strange on her tongue, but joy was fleeting. That afternoon, Silas ventured to check the ridge again. The prints were clearer now. 3 men. Heavy boots. One dragged a foot slightly, old injury maybe. They weren't hiding. They wanted to be found. He knelt beside one track, frowning. The tread matched a pattern he hadn't seen in years. Military issue, or close enough. As he rose, a branch cracked behind him. He spun. A figure stepped out from the trees, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a patched wool coat and a smug grin beneath a thick beard. "Well, well," the man drawled. "Silas Kane. Ain't this something?" Silas leveled his rifle in an instant. Jeb Cartwright, a bounty hunter turned outlaw. They'd served together once briefly, until Jeb had murdered a marshal and fled into the hills. Silas had assumed him long dead. "Didn't think you'd hole up with a squaw and 2 little ones," Jeb continued, nodding toward the smoke curling from a cabin chimney. "Real cozy setup you got." Silas's finger twitched near the trigger. "You've got about 3 seconds to turn around." "Easy now," Jeb said, spreading his hands mockingly. "I got no quarrel with you. Word just got out. $50 bounty on a Comanche woman and her kid, seen north of the pass. Tribal folks want her dead. Whites want her captured. Either way, someone's paying. And where there's gold. You think I'd sell her out?" Silas growled. Jeb tilted his head. "Didn't figure you for the sentimental type, but I've been wrong before." A second figure appeared behind Jeb. A wiry man with a scar down his cheek and a rifle slung loose over his shoulder. More followed, 3 in all. They fanned out slowly. Silas backed away, steps measured. "You come to my cabin, you won't leave upright." Jeb smiled wider. "We'll see about that." By the time Silas returned to the cabin, blood thundered in his ears. He barred the door. Nani stood, alert, baby in arms, while Tiva clutched her doll tightly. "They're coming," he said simply. She nodded once. "How many?" 3. "Maybe more." "We fight. We fight." They prepared as best they could. Silas loaded both rifles, stashed knives in reachable places. Nani set boiling water on the stove, an old trick, but a painful one. Tiva helped carry ammunition, her small hands trembling but steady. There was no time for fear now, only grit. As dusk fell, the forest grew still again. Then a whistle. Silas stood by the window, rifle raised. Voices drifted through the trees. "Come on out, Kane. Let's not make this messy." Nani pressed her back to the wall, eyes scanning the shadows. Tiva crouched beneath the table, baby beside her in the basket. Silas didn't speak, didn't answer. He waited. A shot rang out, splintered the doorframe. Silas fired back, shattering the tree trunk where Jeb had hidden. Screams echoed. Return fire lit up the clearing. Chaos erupted. A window shattered. Nani threw the boiling water through it. A scream following the scalded yelp on the other side. Silas ducked, fired again, clipped someone's leg. The man shrieked, dropped behind a bush. Another shadow moved for the door. Silas turned, too late. The door burst open. A man stormed in, gun raised. Tiva screamed. Nani lunged forward, knife flashing. She drove the blade deep into the man's side. He staggered, dropped the gun. Silas finished him with a clean shot to the chest. One down. Outside, the rest scattered, rattled, wounded, not ready for this kind of fight. Jeb's voice rang out, furious. You're dead, Kane. You hear me? You and your damn red woman. Another shot. Then silence. They waited. 10 minutes. 20. Nothing. They're gone, Silas said finally, lowering the rifle. Nani sagged against the wall, breathing hard. Tiva ran to her, burying her face in her side. The baby wailed, but quieted when pressed to her mother's chest. Silas looked around the room. Blood stained the floor. The door hung crooked on broken hinges. Smoke drifted from the fireplace, mingling with the iron scent of violence. They'll be back, Nani said. He nodded grimly. Not if we find them first. She met his gaze. No fear. Only fire. I will not run, she said. You won't have to. The baby stirred, eyes fluttering open. Outside, the trees stood dark and silent again, but the silence had teeth. They weren't finished. Not yet. The morning after the attack dawned red and angry. A sharp wind hissed through the hollow, dragging the scent of blood and gunpowder from the splintered cabin door into the wild. Smoke rose thin from the chimney. Inside, silence clung to every corner, but it was not fear anymore. It was resolve. Silas finished patching the door, with rough boards scavenged from a lean-to. His knuckles were split, blood crusted around the nails. Every joint ached, but his hands worked fast, methodical. Last night had changed everything. They'd been found. And he knew men like Jeb Cartwright didn't slink off into the trees unless they planned to come back with fire and fury. Nani stepped into the light beside him, her rifle slung across her back, one arm cradling the baby, the other resting near the hilt of a knife at her waist. Her movements were slower than before. The healing had not finished, but there was something different in her eyes. A hard clarity. She had bled in this place, fought for it. It was hers now, too. They won't stop, she said, not asking. No, Silas replied. Not unless we stop them first. She shifted the baby to her other hip and glanced toward the tree line. Then we go. Before nightfall. The plan came together like clockwork. Silas knew the land. He had mapped it in solitude, drawn it in the back of his mind 1,000 times while wandering alone. There was a rocky outcrop 3 ridges west, a natural choke point. If Jeb and his men were hunting them, they'd pass through it, cocky, thinking they had the high ground. Silas had ambushed men there before. He would do it again. By mid-morning, they were packed. Tiva clutched her doll and a small bundle of dried meat. She did not cry, did not speak, only walked between her mother and Silas like a child used to running. Nani moved with calm precision, baby strapped to her chest, eyes scanning the horizon as if she were already hunting. They left the cabin behind without looking back. The trail twisted through frozen underbrush and narrow deer paths. Silas led them with his rifle in hand. His coat flapped in the wind, his hat pulled low. Nani followed close, her boots sure on the uneven terrain. Tiva kept pace, quiet as a shadow. At the ridge, they stopped. Silas crouched behind a craggy boulder and scanned the woods below. The air was deathly still. A crow flapped once, landed, then stilled. The forest watched with bated breath. Nani set the baby in a nest of firs between 2 rocks. Tiva curled beside her, arms wrapped protectively around the infant. Silas and Nani positioned themselves on opposite flanks, rifles loaded, breathing slow and deep. They waited. And then the woods stirred. Voices. Footsteps. Jeb's drawl cutting through the trees like a saw blade. He laughed, loud, careless, confident. "Found the cabin empty," he called. "Thought you'd run, Silas. But I know you better than that." Silas didn't move, didn't blink. Jeb stepped into the clearing beneath the ridge, 3 men at his back, rifles loose in their hands. They walked slowly, eyes sweeping the rocks. One man spat into the dirt. "I give you one more chance," Jeb shouted. "Turn over the woman. You can walk away." From her position, Nani stood. The crack of her rifle split the air. The man beside Jeb dropped, blood blooming across his chest. Silas fired next. The second man spun, fell into the brush. Panic erupted. Jeb scrambled for cover, screaming orders. The third man fired blindly, but his shot went wide. Silas emerged from behind his rock and moved fast, his boots crunching gravel. One well-placed shot, and the last man dropped. Only Jeb remained. He backed up against a pine, breathing hard, rifle shaking in his hands. "Cain," he shouted, "don't be a damn fool. You can't protect her forever." Silas stepped into the clearing, rifle leveled, cold fury burning in his eyes. "You don't get to say her name," he said. A shot rang out. Jeb fired first, his bullet grazing Silas's coat. Silas didn't flinch. He squeezed the trigger. Jeb's body jerked, rifle falling from his hands as he collapsed in the snow, blood blooming beneath him. Silence fell again. A terrible, final silence. Nani stood at the edge of the ridge, breath misting in the cold air. Her rifle lowered slowly. "It's over," she said. Silas didn't answer right away. He just stared at the man on the ground. The past had died with Jeb Cartwright, and yet the weight of it still pressed on his shoulders. But when he looked up at Nani, something eased. Not forgiveness, there was too much history for that. But maybe peace. They returned to the cabin by dusk. It stood waiting, smoke still curling from a chimney. The door hung straight now, repaired. The blood was gone from the floor. The place looked almost unchanged. But inside, everything was different. That night, they sat around the fire, the baby cooing softly, Tiva nestled between them with her doll tucked under her chin. The room was warm, lit in amber and gold. Outside, snow began to fall in slow spirals. Nani watched the flames. Her fingers brushed the baby's cheek. "I thought I was dead," she said. "When I lay under that tree, I thought I was already gone." Silas stirred the fire. "I thought I was done with people, with kindness. Thought the world had no place left for it." She looked at him. "You saved us." He met her eyes. "You saved me back." They were quiet for a moment. Then Tiva, her voice soft and hesitant, asked, "Can we stay here? Forever?" Silas looked at Nani. She looked at him. "I reckon we can," he said. The baby sneezed, a tiny, sharp sound. They all laughed, and the room filled with something rare and whole. Weeks passed. Snow melted. Spring crept back over the land, shy and bright. They planted seeds in the soil behind the cabin. Silas built a second room. Tiva gathered flowers and learned to read from old books stacked in a chest. Nani hunted with Silas, laughed with him, argued, and worked beside him. The baby grew strong, her cries fierce and full of life. One morning, under the tall pine where Silas had once buried his grief, they exchanged vows. No preacher, no crowd, just a circle of stones, the sky above them, and the forest for witness. He held her hands and said, "You brought me back." She answered, "You gave me something worth staying for." Tiva scattered petals and beamed. The baby babbled as if offering her own blessing. And the fire that burned in that cabin was no longer just warmth against the cold. It was hope forged in blood and loss. It was something new. If you listen closely, some nights you can still hear laughter in the hollow. Not the hollow kind that echoes off empty walls, but the full, rich kind born of survival, born of love, born of a promise that no matter what the world tried to take from them, they would build something stronger, something that would never burn again. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. every voice matters, just like every life in the wild does.